Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Heitzen, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started Art of Procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And in today's podcast, I'm going to share with you a conversation from a recent AOP live webinar with Phil Schoonmaker, CEO of SupplyLogic. Phil answers my questions and questions that we received from the webinar audience about the current state of the marketing supply chain and how procurement can assess their baseline environment using both quantitative and qualitative data. And as a special thank you to Art of Procurement listeners, SupplyLogic has created a health check survey where you can benchmark the current state of your print, point of sale, and branded merchandise categories against best practices and industry benchmarks. To download that survey, just go to the show notes page for today's episode, which is artofprocurement.com/episode 392. That's artofprocurement.com/episode 392. Okay then, let's go straight into the conversation with Phil, where I ask him if he found procurement or did procurement find him?
Procurement definitely chose me, Phil. I started my career as a quant on the New York Mercantile Exchange.
Yeah.
And I've always loved solving puzzles, and I was drawn to how much of an effect math could have on the commodity markets.
Yep.
The problem with it, though, for me was that I couldn't connect my work to a greater purpose. So if I did a great analysis, my traders made more money, and if I didn't, they just made a little less money. You know. But I didn't feel like I was producing anything of substance. So I took a job at a management consulting firm called GreenPack, which was focused on making corporate supply chains more environmentally friendly. So again, solving puzzles, but now with a connection to something that I was and am very passionate about, the environment and sustainability. GreenPack was purchased by a company called Williams Lee in 2005, which had just come over from the UK to expand their marketing services business into the US market. I led the solutions team there and managed large-scale enterprise business process outsourcing engagements in the marketing services space. We grew really quickly, and I leveraged that experience to create an indirect procurement managed services firm called LogicSource from Bain Capital Ventures. I exited LogicSource in 2012, and since then have continued to build my career in the marketing supply chain industry, most recently as the CEO of SupplyLogic, and we're a leading tech-enabled managed services provider focused in the print, point of sale, and branded merchandise categories.
So I want to start by talking about the marketing category as a whole. So it's, one of the things that we've learned when we talk to your team in preparing for the event is that, the marketing category is obviously much broader than I think a lot of procurement professionals realize. So I wonder if, just kind of to set the scene and to give some context, how would you describe the category to people who perhaps have a traditional notion of what they think marketing is versus what the reality is?
Sure. Well, I put marketing spend in quotes into two broad categories. The first I'll call strategic marketing spend, and those are the big marketing ideas in the print and digital channels, and the related creative and design of those big ideas. And those are always managed internally by the CMO and her team, his or her team, and often with the support of a creative agency. So that's kind of the strategic side of marketing. And then the other side of marketing is the marketing operations spend. And those are all of the services directly related to the execution of those big ideas. And those services include creative execution, strategic sourcing, vendor management, production management, kitting, fulfillment, inventory management, data analytics, the supporting technology that kind of enables it all. And because of that complexity, the majority of companies really struggle to optimize those categories. That's why we exist.
Yeah, and you need a lot of expertise in each one of those individual categories that is very difficult, I think, for most procurement organizations alone to have, because you may be only touching it once every year or 2 years or 3 years. It's not something that you necessarily, as a procurement professional, in every single day in most organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of one of the challenges is that even though it's a procurement function by and large, it sits within marketing. So
Mm-hmm.
the team that is doing the day-to-day tactical management of those categories sits within marketing and generally doesn't have the expertise to manage them effectively as a procurement professional would. But the procurement folks are doing other things that are somewhat related to marketing, but not those tactical things that are servicing marketing directly.
Right. So when we think about the category, there's obviously where we are in the world right now. We're coming a year into the pandemic. A lot of categories have changed, and a lot of categories have got a lot of challenges and opportunities that may not have existed 12 months ago even. What do you see here in first quarter 2021 of being the biggest challenges in the marketing supply chain?
Well, because of COVID, probably starts every big list of challenges that you talk to everybody about lately, but companies have to do a lot more with fewer resources.
Yeah.
And execution resources, by and large, have been disproportionately affected by staff reductions over the past year. At least that's what we've seen in our client base.
Mm-hmm.
That puts a tremendous amount of stress on the entire marketing supply chain. And that's a major reason why we're growing, though. We operate on site at our clients' headquarters as an extension of our clients' marketing and procurement teams, so we can supplement those lost resources.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of challenge number one. Related to that are all of the supply chain disruptions, delays, material shortages, insolvencies in the supplier community, the supplier marketplace, brought on by the economic impact of COVID. Operational risk protocols have always been a big part of our business, but even more prevalent over the last year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, I would say is a challenge of the marketing supply chain unrelated to COVID is managing these categories in an evolving marketplace.
Right.
Companies want to move to as close as they can to a one-to-one marketing strategy across both print and digital channels. But most companies are challenged by time, resources, lack of capability sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes restricted by their direct supplier relationships and point technology solutions to be able to achieve those goals.
Do you find that because organizations are having to become a lot more responsive to their customers, this is a category that when you think of things like branded merchandise, a point of sale, it's things that you would think have longer lead times. It's not something you can just flick a switch on. Mm-hmm. Do you see that being a challenge for the marketers in terms of being a lot more responsive to ultimately the needs of the customers and the needs of their organization in positioning their company as the world changes, quickly around them?
Yeah, absolutely. You do have to kind of skate to where the puck is going, as they say, right? You can't. Mm-hmm. There are lead times associated. However, technology, at least in our business, is an enabler to help speed up that time to market through, first of all, through process efficiencies, and then through the ability to variabilize content at the local level and then deliver materials very quickly to those locations. It's a big part of our business.
What would you say by variabilize, just for from a description perspective? What do you mean by that? I'm sure that a lot of people on the call know what that term is, but just if there's anybody on the call that doesn't.
Yeah. So most businesses that we work with, not all, but most, are multi-location businesses. So think of large franchisee, convenience stores, restaurants, retail organizations, financial services. Most businesses in general are multi-location and have some type of disaggregated presence. So each one of those locations has unique needs. So if you're a large convenience store located in Los Angeles, you might have different demographic and business needs than one located in New York. Like you absolutely do. And what you want to do is market to those high value individuals that are going to visit your store.
Yeah.
Think about how challenging that could be for a corporate marketing team that has thousands of locations and limited resources to be able to speak to each one of those thousands of locations on an individual basis. So what our technology does is it allows the franchisee or the end user to go into the technology and manipulate and customize that content according to corporate marketing's guidelines. So it's kind of playing within a pre-described sandbox of sorts, that everything is pre-approved. You can adjust the imagery to different demographics and different ages. You can adjust the pricing structure, you can adjust the tagline oftentimes, you can adjust the product mix. And then when you buy that item, we manage the production and distribution of it, so you get exactly what you need that's unique to your business that will attract the most valuable customers to your store.
And then I'm guessing the marketer gets a lot of data then to figure out, it's almost like real-time A/B testing from a marketing perspective in your point of sale to see what actually resonates.
That's exactly right.
Marketing is one of those categories where procurement, for as long as I've been involved in procurement, which is 20 years or so, has often been kind of the last frontier. As you're going on a transformation program, you maybe pick other categories to engage with first, and marketing seen as being maybe it's a little bit difficult, or maybe it's you go in there and try traditional procurement practices and they don't go very well. What's your advice, as you see on a day-to-day basis? Obviously, a lot of organizations, from a lot of procurement organizations working hand in hand with their marketing stakeholder. What defines those relationships that are the most impactful relationships between procurement and marketing?
Well, I think if you're asking how procurement can be a trusted advisor to marketing, which is really the goal, and I think that's by helping marketing achieve what's most important to them.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I think historically, procurement and marketing have had some friction between them. However, I think that the walls have been broken down over the last 10 years or so. And what I mean is, if procurement can sponsor and support a holistic managed services solution that, at the very least, maintains but almost always enhances brand quality, accelerates speed to market, and integrates technology that improves marketing's ability to target the right customers and prospects, then marketing is going to be receptive to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think historically procurement has said, you spend too much money, I don't understand what you're spending money on, and you need to spend less. And that's probably not the right approach to deal with marketing folks.
No. Maybe there's some subcategory or even a part of a subcategory where that's the right approach, but you got to kind of figure that out as you go, as opposed to going in there with the assumption that I'm going to take that approach across all categories of spend.
Yeah, it's a nuanced category for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot of teeth to it.
So I just want to remind anybody who's on the call and listening to the conversation, if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the either in the chat or the Q&A section, and then Kelly will jump on into asking those as they come in. Now, I want to go to a question that Sarah asked, and this is one of the questions that we received in advance. And Sarah asked, what role does procurement and supply systems play in the effective management of the marketing category?
Well, procurement systems are tools. Right? In the right hands, a tool can be really valuable. In the wrong hands, they just organize and track bad buying. Procurement systems in general. As a managed service that only exists in the marketing supply chain, we have the experience to manage the really incredible diversity across the tens of thousands of suppliers in the marketplace. So we use those tools for sure, but there's a ton of nuance to the category, and even in today's high-tech environment, strategic, mutually beneficial personal relationships between supplier and provider are maybe even more important than ever. Mm-hmm. In addition to procurement technology, we leverage rate cards. We often decouple the procurement of raw materials from production, which is a great way to save money and to streamline the process. We employ spot buying techniques for certain products, reverse auction, sole sourcing, and other techniques, depending on what we're buying.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you find there are certain tactics or strategies that a marketer is more open to, let's say? So you think about splitting production from the strategic, and I think that any stakeholder is still, they don't necessarily want to lose their supplier, and bringing in new suppliers obviously drives change. How do you feel I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit, but ways that you typically can get easier buy-in from stakeholders versus in certain tactics versus others that you may wait until you've built a stronger relationship and demonstrated that you've got some results?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think continuity is really a key word that we try to infuse in all of our relationships. And what I mean is, relationships are important, and especially at the supplier level. Most of our clients, the vast majority of our clients, have some great suppliers, right? Yeah. And a key differentiator between us and a print supplier is we're asset free, right? So we manage the suppliers. Mm-hmm. So it's our job to manage a supplier panel on behalf of our customers. It's in our best interest, and it's also in the customer's best interest to maintain as many of those relationships as possible. And typically speaking, about 75% of our future state supplier panel are populated by suppliers who used to service the client directly.
Right.
Now, kind of the cool thing about it is, for the marketer, it's great because they continue to get serviced by those suppliers that have saved them on a Sunday night or have serviced them for 25 years, and those great solid relationships that you want to perpetuate. Procurement loves it because you get kind of great service and continuity of operations, and the supplier loves it because they're now part of a supplier panel where they have an indirect sales channel into a much greater aggregate spend that they have with the client. Like I tell clients all the time that we're actually a better client to that supplier than you are, because we spend X times more in the marketplace than you do, and we can give that supplier so much more work that they don't have access to right now, which then lowers pricing for everybody.
Yeah, and you get to understand, because you're involved from a governance perspective and an account management perspective, you get to understand exactly what they want and information and insights that they may not necessarily get on their own.
That's exactly right.
Now, I have a question about kind of baselining performance. We talked about the kind of theme of today's discussion is taking really procurement's impact to the next level. But oftentimes we don't necessarily know what good looks like, or if what we're doing is actually, where it falls on the maturity scale. So I just wonder if you could share a little bit about how a procurement leader can think about baselining their current performance in this area of spend.
Okay, this is a great question. I think first by getting educated, right? So today is a great first step in that process, and one of many. It's a hard category to get your head around. There's a lot to sift through. It touches a lot of functional areas within a business. On the provider side, you have print suppliers, brokers, distributors, consultants, indirect management companies, and then you have specialized managed services providers like SupplyLogic. You have this universe of different solutions to pick from, all of which on the surface kind of look the same. So it's a tough environment to kind of get your head around if you haven't lived it for a long time. Now, once you understand the landscape and you've decided what fits your business best, the most effective way to baseline current performance is an objective analysis of the current state. And that, in my mind, and granted I'm biased in that regard, is it should be conducted by an unbiased and expert managed services provider. You need to find a company, whether it's SupplyLogic or one of our competitors, that will look at your current state objectively. Us and our competitors, we're not printers, right? So we're not incented to print more. We're not incented to tell you to print more, or to design items in such a way that will only run on our presses. So key number one is choose one provider in the managed services space to conduct a really thorough analysis. The analysis really should be sponsored by the C-level in both marketing and procurement to make sure that we've got the proper governance over that assessment. And then what needs to be focused on are these following things. These are really important. So number one, an open book analysis of the quantitative aspects of the current state. So that includes current state pricing, rate cards, supplier contracts, specifications. All of this data is used as the foundation for a pricing exercise that will measure the potential savings off of a baseline. So in the managed services space, the vast majority of our models are savings based, and they work off of a baseline. And again, as an unbiased, non-asset based provider, we need to work off of a baseline in a fully transparent way. So being able to see pricing, seasonality, rate cards, all that good stuff is really important. And then number two, the development of a deep understanding of the qualitative aspects of the current state. And these include current state processes, internal resource allocations, supplier relationships and the related SLAs, and the supporting technology that the company might be using. And these are all levers that, in my experience, they get overlooked a lot of times in these analyses, but have a tremendous amount of influence on pricing, plus on how optimized your current state is. Now, unfortunately, far too many companies think an RFP will achieve the same result in this space, but it doesn't. For the print, branded merchandise, and point of sale categories, the only way to get a true baseline is to go through the assessment that I described, in my opinion. I've yet to see an RFP duplicate that. Now, what I've seen become popular recently, which I'm becoming a pretty big fan of, and we're in one of these processes right now, is the company will identify 3 to 5 providers that they feel good about, and they'll conduct a very thorough RFI process in order to select the one provider who will conduct the assessment. I think that's a great compromise, because then you can check the box that you've done your diligence, but at the same time, you're going to get the benefit of doing a really thorough assessment the right way.
Now, what do you feel are the challenges of using an RFP in this category?
Well, I think it's too complicated of a category and has too many qualitative aspects to get a full picture of it by looking at the numbers. And RFPs, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, other than the general questions of tell us about your strategy and all the kind of, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be kind of question. It's generally a pricing exercise, and you don't get full visibility across the entire scope of spend. Like, let's say a company spends $10 million in this category, you're going to get an RFP and you're going to get 50 products. You have no idea if those are representative of the whole. You have no idea what the buying patterns are. By and large, you're getting 50 products with a pricing grid. Price these in certain quantities, and we're going to pick one supplier because we like their pricing plus their answers in the other section. You get a snapshot in time. You don't get any of the benefits of what a managed services provider can bring to a business.
Yeah, you kind of go down the market basket route because it makes it easier. Now, from your perspective, how do you apply kind of Pareto? Do you look at everything that they buy? Do you do a 80-20 and say, you know what, this is what's most impactful? Or are you taking a look at, the entirety of the spend across all categories when you're doing that assessment?
Great question. It depends on the scope, right? So I'll kind of do two ends of the spectrum. So what we always try to do is get a representative set of specifications and do a benchmarking exercise that will be representative of the whole. It's impossible to benchmark every single product. It would take years. It's not worth it, right? So what you want to do is find a representative set for the categories that are in scope of the assessment. So at one end of the spectrum, I'll call it the simple end, are circulars, FSIs, freestanding inserts, right? Companies still use these and will use them, it seems like, forever. And by and large, if you're a company that utilizes circulars or FSIs, they don't change very much at all. It's a piece of paper with some very basic print on it. The paper specs are remarkably consistent. The quantities are remarkably consistent. The scheduling is remarkably consistent. If let's say they had 50 events a year, one basically every week, I could take out to market 10% of those because I know that it's representative of the whole because there's so little variability in the specification. Right? Yeah. That's one end of the spectrum. Right? The other end of the spectrum are things like branded merchandise and highly customized marketing materials like direct mail. We're going to need a little bit more in terms of a representative set of samples, and we'll work with the customer to determine what that is. Sometimes it's 10, 20, sometimes even 50% of the specs.
You talked about, a lot of the baselining is based on savings, and obviously trying to find savings when you're doing the assessment. Are there some typical savings methodologies that you see or that you recommend over and over again? Because the range of savings methodologies can be pretty huge that you can apply to any category. I'm just wondering if there's any specific ones that you found that kind of work in the marketing ops space that that stakeholders kind of engage with. Stakeholders look at that and say, what, that makes sense, as opposed to them always trying to push back and say, what, that's kind of made up.
Sure. Well, I think that there's two questions there in my mind. One is, how do you measure the savings? And then one is, what is the commercial model that governs the relationship? Because those are often savings based. So we have models where we contractually guarantee our savings. And we have models where we don't contractually guarantee, but we have upside incentive for both ourselves and the customer. And that really depends on what the customer wants to achieve and what the environment looks like. So we can kind of do both. As far as methodology goes, there are three broad categories in which the products are going to fall and how you measure them. There's going to be exact matches. So the FSI is a great example of that. Very easy to measure. Everybody can get their head around it. I bought it last year. I bought it again. Last year it was $1. This year it's 90 cents, right? Very simple. Then there's the second category, which is similar, but not exact. And we can use extrapolation and math to make those connections. So it could be the direct mail program this year ran with 20% less quantity, but the size was slightly bigger. The paper was slightly thicker. It was 5-color instead of 4-color. We have all of the formulas, essentially, to normalize that data so that you can make comparisons. And that's all vetted and approved by the customer prior to going live. Yeah. And then the third category is something that we've never bought before, and maybe we'll never buy again, so we don't have a baseline. And in that case, we have a strategy around a 5-bid process in a completely transparent way to make sure that we're getting the best price in the market. And then once we get that price, it then joins the baseline data set, which is the collection of all of the pricing from the current state. It then joins the baseline data set to be measured if it ever gets bought again.
Right. And Kelly, I'm going to come to you. I see some questions have come in. I just want to ask one last question on the methodology perspective. When you're baselining and kind of getting buy-in to the methodology that you use, are you bringing marketing and perhaps even finance into the conversation so they're approving that methodology before you even go to market, so that there's a full understanding of what the value drivers are before you even start a project?
Absolutely, without a doubt. We're absolutely doing that. We work with marketing, finance, and procurement equally in that regard. So all three of those functional areas are part of a process like this.
Okay. Yeah. So Kelly, I want to hand over the reins to you I think we've got a couple of questions in from the audience.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in. And in fact, this first one, thank you so much, Don, because you've asked the $1 million question when it comes to procurement and marketing spend. So we've talked a little bit about savings methodology, and we've talked about finance sign-off, and we've talked about commercial models, but how does procurement handle the issue of marketing being concerned that savings is ultimately going to cut their budget, thereby disincentivizing them from trying to get the savings in the first place?
Well, that's a great question. You know what? I don't know if that's a question for me to answer, because we liberate a tremendous amount of savings. Ultimately, we give that savings to the corporate entity. What the company decides to do with it is a little bit outside of our scope of responsibility. I don't know if I can help with that one, but ultimately, I think that you need to set up a system where all parties benefit. Certainly, when we liberate savings, you can drop it to the bottom line. You can reinvest it to market deeper, which is what a lot of our marketing customers do, which I think was what they would want to hear. And you can invest it in procurement initiatives. I mean, whatever makes the most sense for the business to reallocate those dollars is really what we try to do. But that's up to you guys.
And perhaps one of those issues where over time procurement has been sort of left, stuck with the fact that it's the company, it's the C-suite making the decision to claw that money back from the budget, right? That if the value is there, if you're able to get what you need for a lower price, it's not on procurement that we're the ones taking that away from marketing, as long as the value is being delivered and the overall need is being met.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that I would look at it a little bit differently if I was a marketer. I wouldn't look at it as as though my budget was being cut. I would look at it as is my new solution achieving the goals that I'm trying to achieve as a company and as a marketer. So if I can reach more customers and better customers faster with a new solution, if it costs less, that seems like a no-brainer for me. And if it costs less, then even better.
Absolutely. So the other question that has come in is from Leah. And she's asking a question about sort of the managed service model where you're sitting between procurement and then the suppliers. How do you handle the issue of remaining objective, or maybe another way to put it is equally interested in the success of procurement and the marketing departments they're trying to support, and also in the marketing providers that you are connecting them with?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, any great relationship and engagement is going to be defined by the objectives that we all collectively agree to. And if we go into a great multi-year relationship together, it's going to be defined by certain goals and objectives, right? And we're going to be working hard, and we're going to be contractually obligated to deliver on those objectives. One thing to remember about our model is we operate on site as an extension of the marketing and procurement teams. So, oftentimes the folks who are doing the buying now in the marketing operations department, not in the procurement, by and large, I haven't seen it yet, transition over to our management. They work for us and they continue to work on site. And we enhance that team with better systems, better buying power, better technology, better processes. So we're sitting as part of your team, with part of the team that you used to actually be working with. So we're all one unit. We're all incented the same way, and we're all pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll come back to Kelly as we get more questions from you today. I do want to go into a question that Connor asked, as one of the questions we got in from the registrants before the session. And Connor asks that with next level indirect being the focus of the conversation, do you think the next level of indirect is going to be a focus on automation, on supply-based integration, or perhaps giving back more control to requesters? Procurement being more of an enablement of guided buying as an example. Where do you see things evolving to?
Well, I see the focus of the next level of indirect specific to the marketing operations in these categories specifically as an accelerating shift towards outsourcing is what I see. Companies now have the ability to plug into a managed service to deliver incredible value in several ways. One is leverage of aggregate spend in the marketplace. These categories, print, branded merch, and point of sale, are holding remarkably steady and even growing in a lot of areas. I think people glom on to the notion that because there are so few newspapers anymore that nobody prints anything anymore, but it couldn't be further from the truth. It's a growing industry. And we spend significantly more than any one of our customers. So we're just going to get much better pricing. So that's number one. Number two, access and management of leading technology. Most businesses want to move to a model of giving control back to the requesters, as the question asked, and especially for multi-location businesses. And obviously you need great technology to allow that to happen, but you also need all of the supporting supply chain aspects that sit behind that technology. It's not just the website, it's how all of the suppliers are connected to it. It's how all of the production and inventory and distribution and kitting are connected to it. And that's complex. And we provide all that. And then lastly, aligned objectives is what I would say is, as an asset-free model, we're not incented to print more like a supplier is. So as companies move into the next level of indirect procurement, I think it's about aligning objectives with providers who are trying to reach the same goals you are. And that includes an asset-free model as a provider. We're not incented to print more. In the broadest sense, we're always provided to drive to the lowest responsible cost of ownership. We want to maintain or enhance brand standards, accelerate speed to market, and mitigate operational risk. And those things are all, I think, best practices and part of what the next level of indirect procurement will be.
So I have a question that came in as well in advance, and this is, what are the most important variables in determining whether to adopt or make a change with the current provider supporting this area of business? How should you choose whether to switch providers or not in the marketing ops space?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak specifically about making a change to a managed services model, just because that's what I do and that's what my experience has been. The most important variable by far is cultural readiness. Yeah. So if a company isn't ready to outsource to a managed services provider, it will not be successful. They'll go kicking, screaming, it'll be a nightmare. A managed services relationship is transformative, and not every company is ready. Now, the reality is most companies outsource certain functions already, whether it's IT or HR, AP, AR, really important functions. Yeah. But marketing operations has taken a little bit longer to get there. I think there's a lingering perception that the marketing function is more core to a business than some of those other ones that I described. But in certain marketing functions are, like the strategic side of marketing is something that we do not get involved with. We partner very closely with the CMO and her team. But the execution of that strategy, marketing execution, should not be a core function to any company. And I think more and more companies are realizing that. And that's why we're seeing such growth in our industry. Another variable would be scope. There's wiggle room here in terms of size, but generally speaking, there needs to be enough critical mass to make it worthwhile for all parties to engage in a migration to a managed services model. And that tends to be around this, like I said, there's some wiggle room, but around 5 million a year of annual spend across all of these categories.
And that's US dollars.
US dollars, yeah, US.
So I've got a lot of background in outsourcing, been involved in both sides of the table, and what you said there about cultural readiness is so important. A few years ago, I actually built a model that helped kind of figure out whether you as an organization is ready to outsource in the first place. And there's so many variables that go into that, whether, there could be a great value prop, but if on the inside you're not ready for it, then ultimately you're going to, it's not going to, I won't say it's going to fail, it's just you're not going to get the maximum value that you can out of a relationship like that. One of the things that I found, and I'm interested to know your perspective, is do you feel like there has to be a burning platform to look at using a managed service provider in the space? So there's already some kind of goal that you can build a change program around that supports going to a different model than an internally managed model.
I do. I think there needs to be, whether you call it a burning platform or a charter initiative, I do think there needs to be C-level engagement and desire to move toward a managed services model for it to be adopted.
Yeah. And on that topic is, I look at ways that things can go wrong. And a lot of times in the pure procurement outsourcing space, one of the challenges you would get is you would have a lot of low-hanging fruit and there's a lot of opportunity to be picked. And you have a long-term agreement, and maybe 3-4 years into that agreement, the world has changed and the user organization wants something different. So I'm interested if you see that in the marketing ops space from where you play, and if so, kind of how do you think about making sure that how it is that you're helping your clients kind of evolves as their needs change? Because the worst thing I see is, the needs of a client evolves and the service provider supporting them doesn't. That just always leads to friction in the middle of a contract.
It definitely does, without a doubt. I mean, the way that I think about it as the CEO of the business is the day that we sign a contract, we're already working for the renewal of that contract 3 or 5 years. And the only way you do that is by providing innovation at all times. There's the old saying, you come in on price, you go out on price.
Right.
I'm a big believer in that. I think you need to provide tangible and sustainable savings. I think that's kind of a minimum ticket to the dance. But for an integral part of a marketing team, it's our job to make sure that we're pulling our clients forward at every opportunity. That includes technologies in the marketplace on the production side. It includes new and innovative technology and integrations. We do lunch and learns and all kinds of vendor innovation summits to make sure that our clients are at the cutting edge of what they want to do from a marketing perspective. And again, not being incented to print more, we're incented to find the best marketing material on behalf of our customers. And if that means migrating something from a printed object into something digital, we're all for it.
And that's actually a great segue into a question I have from Michael, and this is very category specific question. Michael is from a financial services company, and he asks if there's any kind of measure or benchmarking on what's an appropriate mix of print versus digital marketing channels. Do you see kind of benchmarks around that space, or is it extremely either industry focused or even organization and culture focused?
No, I think it's both. The first thing is how do you really measure it, right? So most companies, especially our financial services customers, are trying to achieve that holy grail, a true omni-channel marketing strategy that leverages the efficiency of the digital channel, but the higher perceived value of the print channel.
Yeah.
And companies are getting closer to it, and we're helping them get there. I think that it's still nascent, but we are starting to see some innovative multi-touch campaigns and programs where you can jump between channels and it's very cohesive and very data-driven.
Yeah.
I think the first thing you have to do is choose to work with a partner who obviously isn't incented to print something. You've got to work with a marketing ops partner who isn't incented to print. Second, make sure the partner can manage across both channels. As an example, our technology allows a seamless checkout of an item to either the print output or digital output, right? So same item goes into the digital market stream, or it goes as a PDF in an email campaign. So that helps certainly. And lastly, you got to use data to help make good decisions about which channel is performing, how they're performing. And we share all of the data that flows through our technology down to the user level. So you can see what's working and what isn't working, what's being bought by the field, what isn't. Reorder, kind of the reorder cadence to see how quickly things are burning through. And this helps our clients make better decisions constantly.
Now we have a couple of questions as we go into the final area of conversation today around kind of value measurement. I do want to just say as well, if anyone has any questions, please don't be shy and pop them in the question box. But we have something, well, before I go into Gustavo's question, I want to ask more generally. You working with marketers all the time, obviously, as being the key stakeholder. What do you find, because this is something I think is a little bit of a black box to procurement, and I say that not because it's mystical, but perhaps procurement doesn't ask the question. And that is, how are marketers measured? What are their objectives? Because I think we sometimes miss that in the link to what we can do to help them be successful in the things that are important to them.
Right. Well, that's a great question. That's probably the question of every CEO and procurement person in the world, right? How do you judge a marketing person's success? I'm sure Julie on the line here from my company. It's a great question. We provide the tools for that success, right? So we don't come up with the great idea. We enable that idea to get to the marketplace faster and into the hands of the most valuable customers or prospects that a company has. Ultimately, if the idea is bad or the idea doesn't resonate, getting it to the customers faster isn't going to make much of an effect. But what we can do, and what we do for many of our customers, is provide that data on everything that's flowing through our technology, like I mentioned with the financial services example.
Yeah.
That allows our customer to see what is working in real time rather than taking a guess. And that is extremely helpful and helps then have that marketer report back to her or his team to determine what how to proceed forward.
So there's a couple of questions from Gustavo, and the first question I'm going to paraphrase, but it's really around somebody who's on a journey from perhaps traditional procurement practices in this space to something that's a little bit more forward thinking and more mature. And it's similar, I think, to a lot of the folks that you work with, a lot of the clients that you work as they go on that journey. How should Gustavo, as a procurement person, actually measure his performance and evolution in this category? What does success like, and how can he measure success of his team as they're going on that maturity journey?
Okay, well, I think anytime you're moving away from a traditional approach, maybe in really any sphere of life, you're going to encounter some level of resistance. People love the status quo. It's just human nature, right? Typically, my team's greatest challenge isn't convincing the executives of the value of a managed services solution, but the stakeholders, the folks who don't understand what this means for their personal careers, or if their performance is going to be judged harshly because now another company comes in that does this for a living, and they're going to shine a light on what they've been doing, and it may not look that favorable. Those are things that will definitely be encountered and have been dozens of times in my career. I think when you think about measurement and how you can judge the progress of that journey, I think about kind of what is the current state compared to the future state, right? Yeah. So number one, the availability and accuracy of data, right? So in the current state, more often than not, most of the purchasing and spec data is sitting on the marketing ops team's laptops. And the future state is going to be centrally located and transparently shared. So that's a great metric to talk about during the assessment and what you can move to. Kind of related to that, the ownership of assets, including artwork files, tooling maybe, depending on the product mix. In the current state, we always find that the artwork is just scattered to the four winds, or worse, the suppliers have it, which is very typically the case. And in the future state, we have a digital asset management system where all the artwork is centrally located, and it's yours, the customers. Yeah. That's another great measurement. For savings measurement in the current state, generally it's managed at the tactical level, if at all. Future state, the savings are governed by a professional benchmarking methodology that's auditable and reported on a regular basis. You have risk measurement. So what I mean by this is redundancy in the supplier panel, disaster recovery plans, vendor onboarding and auditing, remediation for defective work. In the current state, we rarely see any of these, even in regulatory environments, at least not where they should be. And the single points of failure all the time. And the future state will manage a mutually agreed supplier panel that has all of the redundancies and best practices built in. So again, you can start to measure before and after. And then technology-wise, broadly, we see three current state solutions. One is there's no technology, and that's obviously an opportunity. Number two, the company's using technology that's provided by the print supplier, and there are two major problems with this. Firstly, printers build terrible technology, and secondly, they have you hostage. 99% of the time they own the portal and the assets. Makes it really hard to move away from them without a lot of hassle. Or three, we see too much technology. We worked with a national retailer that had 9 portals. One for badges, one for uniforms, one for marketing materials. It was crazy. They Post-its all over their desk to get all the access codes. So that's another great way to measure. Yeah.
And then from your perspective, like if somebody is outsourced or is brought in a managed service provider to help them in this category, how do they measure the success of the managed service provider? How do your clients measure you and your success?
Yeah, that's a great question. They measure us in tangible ways. So savings commitments. Have we hit our savings guarantee or our savings targets? Have we hit our service levels related to turn times, print quality, brand guidelines, uptime on the technology, lead time for quotes, speed to market? All of the very tangible measurables were measured by those standards. And then there's the I'll call them the intangibles, right? So the intangible measurements, that are super important in a relationship like this, which are what is the quality, clarity, and accuracy of the benchmarking methodology? How hard is it to administer? Is it efficient? Does it monopolize your internal resources every month? Do you need a team of NASA scientists to figure out if you saved the dollar or not? Because I've seen just fantastically complicated models, and they're complicated on purpose by the provider, so you can't figure out what they're doing. So that's one way we're measured. Communication style. Is there free and easy communication between the parties? Are the executives on the provider side invested in the relationship? Frequency and depth of QBRs, quarterly business reviews, which really speaks to how the provider shares information and the quality of their internal systems to report their own performance. How well do we resolve issues? Mistakes are going to happen in the supply chain. How do we resolve them? Are we providing transparent data and reporting, or do you have to constantly ask the provider for it? And are we constantly delivering innovation and transformative savings? Is another way.
Kelly, I know we've asked for some questions as we've gone through the conversation, Phil, and thank you for answering kind of the question of how to measure you and how people can look at that from a managed service perspective, especially those who aren't necessarily used to operating on that model. But Kelly, is there any other questions that have come up from the audience before we wrap up today?
There are actually. There are a couple of interesting questions that come in that actually, I think this is interesting. These questions sort of indicate to me that procurement is more and more seeing marketing spend as being in line with maybe the other categories of spend that they manage. And so Anna is asking around the people not liking change piece. Let's say a company is considering going to a managed services model to address their marketing spend. If they do, in fact, have a couple of incumbent suppliers that they've partnered with in this category for a long time that they want to stay with, how disruptive does that tend to be in terms of the relationship between the company and these marketing suppliers that they would like to continue to partner with?
It's not disruptive at all. So during the assessment, we're going to take a look at all of the current suppliers. Inevitably, some will already be on our supplier panel, some will not. However, about 75% of our clients' incumbent suppliers shift over to the new solution. And as long as they can pass our audit, which is thorough, and it's inevitably more thorough than our customers, as long as they can pass our audit, as long as they're financially stable, as long as they pass all of the credit and risk management and all the ethical and kind of moral clauses associated with that audit, then they're more than welcome to join the panel and continue to produce. They will be producing it at a better price, but they'll be happy to be producing it at that price because they're going to have access to a much greater spend than they would if they just service their customer directly.
Interesting. And kind of a follow-up to something we were talking about earlier. This follow-up is from Leah. She's commenting on the fact that in this discussion, and certainly in the way that you approach market, you're separating the execution-based marketing from kind of the creative services and design side of things. Is that a piece that you find that clients take to naturally, sort of dividing those two pieces out, or does it take a little bit of a journey, a little bit of an adjustment to start thinking about it that way?
It takes a little bit of a journey, but that is the exact discussion that has to be had. And that's why companies like us exist. There is a clear delineation between strategic marketing spend and operational marketing spend, the execution side, which is where we live. And once marketers can get their heads around that, they become much more amenable to the idea of outsourcing it. They tend to dig their heels in when they think that their agency relationship is going to be disaggregated, which it never is, or that the strategic side of marketing is going to be determined for them. And again, it's not. It's just the execution of those great ideas. And once a marketing leader and team can get their heads around kind of partnering with a company that's going to accelerate everything that they want to do in the marketplace, they're our biggest customers, they're our biggest fans. But it's absolutely a journey.
Fantastic, thank you. And then Phil, one more question. I'm going to sneak in one more question here. Tim is asking a question. I think we all have risk in the back of our minds right now. And procurement is more and more taking on responsibility for risk-related activities, which in some cases has more to do with brand image and brand reputation than it does supply chain disruption. Any interesting or observations around how this type of a model or the procurement marketing relationship comes into play and is increasingly visible and critical because of that concern?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that one of the hidden but most important factors in choosing to outsource this category is how risky most current state supply chains are in marketing operations. By and large, we see single source relationships that are single points of failure, where if that supplier went out of business, there would be no way to even recover the artwork or tooling associated with the products that have to be at market. That's even the case in regulatory environments, which is really scary. I see in the single digits on a percentage basis our number of customers that have disaster recovery plans in place, that have access to their own artwork or even own their own artwork, that have clear data that can be pulled at a glance. There's a tremendous amount of operational risk in the marketing supply chain, and it has been a black box for years and years because it's been protected under kind of this marketing. This is just marketing, and it's just fantastically art creative thing that you don't understand, procurement people. But it's a supply chain. There's that really creative part up front, which you're always going to have, marketing team, but then there's the operational part of it, the supply chain nuts and bolts of it, managing that procurement and sourcing activity, related commodities. And that's where we live, and that's what we do, is eliminate all that risk. So if I were a procurement executive, I would absolutely be really focused on those parts of the supply chain and highlighting those risks to a marketing team.
Thanks for listening in to today's Art of Procurement podcast. Now, as a reminder and as a thank you to Art of Procurement listeners, SupplyLogic created a health check survey where you can benchmark the current state of your print, point of sale and branded merchandise categories against their best practices and industry benchmarks. To download that survey, just go to the show notes page for today's episode, which is artofprocurement.com/episode 392. That's artofprocurement.com/episode 392.